Welcome back. I'm Bill Wagner.
And I'm James Sturdivant.
So let's discuss our solution to adding that teacher class into this lab and see how we can factor out some of the common code. So the problem that we gave you was to introduce a teacher that has some of the same capabilities as the student object and some other interesting capabilities that are its own. So let's look at how we would go about solving that problem and where we end up with the final solution in terms of getting that solution solved and trying to factor the common stuff into a single base class. So I've got my solution up on the screen, and this is the final solution. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got there first. As we talked about when we introduced this concept, I did actually go ahead and copy some of the code from the student object and put it into a teacher object. You know, the idea of having an ID and having a first and last name, I just copied right in. And then I implemented the rest of this class. You know, I've got this property for the subject area. I've got a private member field for this list of what classes does this particular teacher teach. And I've got a method to add a class title. And I'm going to look to see if it already exists, and if not, I'll add it to the collection to try to remove a class title. So I'll just go ahead and remove that. And then I've got this property to be able to enumerate all the class titles. And we'll go through this a little bit more, and this is kind of a preview to the next module where we start talking about interfaces.
Yeah, so I noticed here that you mentioned that you copied all that features into there, but I don't actually see them in that base class.
Right, because that was the first thing I did. I just wanted to see what was there and see exactly what things were common. And once I was all done, I found that the things that were common were this idea of an ID and having a first and last names that were changeable. So an ID that's not changeable at all and a first and last name property. You know, and over time we may end up adding more to this, but I definitely have some small bits of common functionality. And so I introduced this idea of a person concept. You know, so we may add other people into this problem as time goes on, other different classifications of people. So I figured, okay, we'll call it a person. So a person has an ID. So you can see that this comes straight out of what was in that student class when we started. So a person has an ID. That's immutable. We create it as soon as the person is created. We've got get and set handlers for the first and last name. You know, and as time goes on, we may end up adding some validation here where, you know, we'll add some extra code so that first name can't be null or can't be empty or can't be blanks. Same thing with the last name, you know, and we'll make sure that that stays valid. Right now, I don't have any of that here.
Yeah, and so that would allow not only the teacher, but also the student to get that functionality.
Right, it would then be in both places at the same time. I'd only have to do it once.
Yeah, and I think another great example here would be if you wanted to get the full name, you could implement this.
I could implement it here.
This person class
exactly.
right
So, you know, this will probably grow over time as we add more behavior to it. And then we end up using that both in our student class, you know, that this is now smaller than it was before. I now have this constructor that if you look, this is the C# syntax to say I want to call a particular constructor in the base class. So I have that colon, then base, meaning call something in my base class, and then I pass that ID down. So we do set the ID in, in the base person portion of this student object. And the first and last name properties are part of a student just by virtue of being derived from that person class. And then in the teacher, we did the same thing. You know, it also derives from person, same basic construction concept. And then it's going to go right down into the implementation that's in the person object to be able to put all those in place and to inherit any of the functionality that's part of that person object. So with that, that's pretty much what we built this time. Not a huge lab, and again, we only have a couple different types right now, but as our program grows, we certainly add more types and we certainly put more things in here and see more common behavior in this abstraction of this idea of a person, teacher, and student, and possibly other classifications. But it gives us a good start.
Great. And so we can find the code out at your GitHub repository.
Right.
Here at billwagner/MVA object-oriented exercises.
And this will be labeled for this particular module. And with that, we'll come back shortly and we'll start to introduce the concept of interfaces, another way to get some polymorphism and some reuse among disparate types in object-oriented programs. See you soon.